Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for November 13th, 2017. Soccer Bowl was yesterday. We have a new champion. The San Francisco Deltas has won what could be the last ever Soccer Bowl. Steven Sandor joins us from the 11.ca to talk about the Soccer Bowl. Duane as well is on the line. Steven, how you doing this morning?
Fine, thanks.
Stephen, as Kevin said, there's lots of things going down off the pitch when it comes to the NASL, but we did have a championship game yesterday. So just real quickly, was it a deserving champion at the end?
I think so. I think when Miami got upset by the Cosmos in the last round, I think that threw everything sort of up into the air. But San Francisco, if any team was you thought couldn't, and that was not Miami, notwithstanding the Cosmos' upset. I'm talking about the weeks leading up to the playoffs, that you thought the only team that might be able to do it would be San Francisco. A team that, especially because of the way that they travel and don't lose on the road, and even though that game was at home for them, but a team that just was resilient. And honestly, while the NASL has been in a state of adversity probably since, almost all of this year, the Deltas have been in a state of adversity probably since the opening kickoff of the season, when it was clear they weren't getting the crowd. I mean, it's ironic now in the playoffs, right, guys, that they were getting almost 10,000 fans out. If that would have been the kind of support they would have had, in the summer, we wouldn't be talking about them pulling the plug. We'd be talking about them being part of this lawsuit to try to keep the NASL up and going. But I've seen San Francisco play a bunch of times because the way the schedule broke down is they had extra games against FC Edmonton. And really a team that really surprised you at how resilient they were. It wasn't always about X's and O's, but it was a group that was really tight-knit. And, I mean, that's become a signature, I think, when you see teams that are coached by Mark Dos Santos. It's not just the tactical part of the game, but it's the stick-to-itiveness. It's the guys who buy into the program, and everyone's sort of willing to do what they need to do to win a game. And that's, San Francisco in a nutshell. And I think that they are a deserving champion, even though, this 1 year may be the only year of its history.
Stephen, you mentioned Mark Dos Santos, and obviously the Deltas you called them Team Canada. Canada wins the Soccer Bowl in your article. A massive Canadian content on this club. Is this sort of, if you look at this carefully enough, is this sort of an advertisement of why the Canadian Premier League might have more talent there and more talent available to it than we think, if we could have a team like this be so successful that relies on so much Canadian talent?
I think Duane, it's an advertisement, not in just the Canadian way, but there's another way as well. And I think it shows in the Deltas as well, and players that I've talked to. For me, the Canadian content struck you with the Deltas, not because they just started 4 Canadians. And again, this goes back to the NASL deciding to make Canadians domestics at the start of the year league-wide. Funny that. The Deltas end up starting 4 Canadians in the game. And, a couple of those guys have had huge, what I would call bounce-back seasons. And Kyle Becker, I think, would be right up there. He assisted on the second goal. I thought he's had a fantastic year. I've seen him play a lot this year because San Francisco, again, has played FC Edmonton a lot. Nana Adekora has really, as a leader, to come back from the knee injury that he came back from knee surgery to play in the playoffs, just really showed a lot of guts to do that. I mean, obviously, you don't have to, no one would have faulted the guy for packing it up when he had his knee injury, saying that the team's not coming back, the league's in turmoil. Why would you come back and risk further injury for something like that? But he did, because of his buy-in into the team and, helped them win a championship. But it's also the amount of guys who are affiliated with Canadian teams who aren't Canadian, but, have those connections with Mark Dos Santos. I'm talking guys like Tom Heineman, Romuald Paiser, Jackson. There's a lot of those connections. And I think that Canadian fans don't quite understand how much many of the foreign players who've come to Canada to play, whether it be with FC Edmonton or Ottawa, the 3 Canadian MLS teams, or other organizations, like playing in Canada. A lot of those guys have told me that they prefer playing in Canada to the United States, especially in the political climate right now. And that I don't think it's going to be as hard for the Canadian Premier League to attract, let's say, some of the foreigners from either MLS or NASL, whether that league exists, or USL, than people think it would be. I think people think, oh, taxes and the exchange rates and what have you. But a lot of these guys prefer the living standard in Canada. And a lot of these guys, you'd be surprised the number of foreign players who've contacted me to ask about the Canadian Premier League. Where do they send? Who do their agents call? Where do they send their tapes to? These are guys who have put some roots in Canada. Either maybe they lived here for a year or two and like it here, but what have you? The Canadian League. I think that a lot of people may be down on Canada as a place to live, and I don't know why, because I think there's a lot of players out there who are, far willing to take the chance to come to Canada to play and to live. And again, I think the political climate right now in North America actually helps the Canadian Premier League, because that would, in fact, I think encourage more foreign players right now to look at Canada as the place they want to play, especially in a league where they might not have to cross the border and don't have to go down the United States. I don't think that people appreciate that enough. And I think the Deltas, obviously playing in a North American league and being an American team, still had a lot of Canadian content with a Canadian coach. And I think that as we see Canadian League start, you're going to see guys like that who have those connections, who are going to be willing to make the plunge and come back to Canada.
Now, Stephen, it's hard to talk about this game without talking about what's next for either players, coaches, and the team. I want to start with Mark Dos Santos and maybe Philip Dos Santos in the same time, but let's start with Mark. Mark has alluded last week to a French journalist from TVA Sports, Vincent Détouche, that his choice is made for next year. His club has been chosen, and he's happy with the choice of his club. He's getting closer to home with a bunch of personnel that believes in him, with the boss that believe in him, and job security. Where do you see Mark Dos Santos in a few months?
Well, I know that I talked to Mark on Thursday, and I mean, he's a little bit. When I talked to him on Thursday, he said to me when I asked about what's next, and I've talked to Mark several times in the last month, just because the team's on the run, and it's been such a good story. And first he told me that he's off contract November 15th. He'd originally signed a 3-year deal to be in San Francisco, and he didn't want it to end this way, but that's the way it was. And then a few weeks ago, he had said he didn't really know what the future held. And then when I talked to him Thursday, he sort of indicated the same thing that he would have said to the French journalist, in the sense of, he said to me that the soccer world, even when you're not looking for a job, sometimes things open up. He's being a bit cryptic, obviously, and I think a bit, he still is under contract to the Deltas. And this is a guy who's not going to sort of sacrifice everything. He doesn't want to be a distraction to his team heading into a final. But I think I know Mark's track, and I think we all know his stated goal, and it's a clear and stated goal. He's made that public, is to eventually coach Canada.
Well, Chelsea first, and then Canada. Yes. Yeah.
I think he'd want to do something that sort of takes him toward that track. I know there's a couple of things that I think he definitely wants to have something longer term. It's been 3 years, 3 teams in the last 3 years, and he wants to be in a situation, I think, where he has control. I think that he understands that it's sort of his team, and I don't think he wants to be beholden to anyone. I think that was the issue with Swope Park, is that in the end, he said publicly that I realized, a few weeks in, I don't want to coach a B team for anybody, and have other people's decisions sort of overrule mine. So I think wherever he goes, it's going to be a place that he has sort of the keys to the kingdom, and a place where I think that's important, and be closer to home and be closer to family. I mean, that was the reason he originally took the Ottawa job a few years back, was so he could be closer to home. So whatever it might be, I can't really say a specific club that I would think, but I know what it would be what situation he's looking for. And let's face it, even though as Mark had said to me that he was, worried about looking for work, he's in demand and probably has his choice of jobs in North America from at least in a lot of, you would say USL sort of teams. I would love to see an MLS team sort of say, okay, you know what, really, you deserve that shot because he does. But I don't know if an MLS team is going to be able to sell the idea of them bringing in a coach who's Canadian. I mean, they would sell the Portuguese side of it way more than they sell the Canadian side.
And the Brazilian experience,
but I'm not really sure, but I know what kind of situation he would want to be in. And that would be a situation where, he's running the show.
I'm asking because I think it's not celebrated enough. Mark Dos Santos has been in back-to-back finals of soccer leagues. He was in the NASL Championship in 2015 with Ottawa. Before leaving, they lost, of course. And then the year after was in the final with Swope Park Rangers. Of course, they lost as well. This year, in the final of the Soccer Bowl, once again, winning the trophy for once. I am asking because the Montreal Impact just named a new head coach, Ream with no North American experience, a vast European and soccer knowledge. But his lack of North American experience could be complemented by a great assistant. And job security as an assistant usually is a little higher. And as well, home is kind of close to home. Is there any chance Mark Dos Santos can become maybe an assistant for the Montreal Impact?
I don't think as a head coach you'd want Mark Dos Santos, because obviously as a head coach, if you had Mark Dos Santos as an assistant, it would put you on the firing watch every week, knowing that he was waiting in the wings. I know when I talked to Mark, I asked him if he'd ever go back to Montreal, and he says, I'm not sure. He said he had some great experiences in Montreal, but he's not sure if he'd ever go back there. But I think, what's one thing, Kevin, that needs to be even said about Mark's success? It's not even so much that he's been to 3 finals in a row. Look at what he's done it with. In 2015, a team in Ottawa that all the players knew was gonna go under budget cuts, right? He already said he's not coming back. That a team that they knew wasn't sort of going to stick together. Those guys knew that things weren't going to be the same with the Fury the next year, and yet he got that group to win the fall season and then get to the final. He did it with he built a Swope Park team that is going to to contest the final again today. But he did that as part of that sort of structure where, he didn't always have all the choices in Swope Park about who was playing because, he had to be beholden to Peter Vermes and the needs of Sporting Kansas City, and did it too with some players that he brought in that were sort of pet project players of his. And I'm thinking about a couple of the Canadian guys and that he brought in. Amir Didic would be the first one jumps to mind, a guy that would have been no one's depth chart a few years ago, and now is a guy that we look at down the road is where he's going to play for Canada. And then this year, San Francisco, a total mess where the players have a pretty good idea that this whole experiment's not going to work, and yet they go out and win a championship. It's not just that Mark Dos Santos has coached teams to finals; he's done it in amazing situations of adversity, where most guys would have teams that would finish well, but with a massive losing record. He somehow squeezes those guys and squeezes the juice out of players to sort of shut out the outside world and play for each other. And I think that is the most amazing part of Mark. So maybe he should go coach Columbus, because that would probably be right up to his alley then, a team that might be moving.
Wow. Columbus 2018 MLS Cup champions. I call it now if Mark Dos Santos takes over.
Mark Dos Santos. Oh, we're moving? Oh, that's fine. That's good. I can work with that. This is easy compared to the last few years.
The famous quote,
specialty there.
I was going to say the famous quote of Mark, when the locker room doors are closed, it's all about us. We don't care about the outside world.
Yeah. I think that's a nice thing to say. I just don't think that's always true. I just think that the fact that you get guys to focus on the game day and on their training sessions it's just fantastic.
All right. Speaking of uncertainty, we should turn the attention to FC Edmonton and what is going to happen next year. We don't know what's happening with NASL. doesn't look good. Certainly Canadian Premier League, as I reported last week, will not be starting in 2018. 2019 is now the focus. So if we splash forward 6 months, what is FC Edmonton doing? Does FC Edmonton still exist in its current form in 6 months?
Well, I think, too, what's interesting, Duane, is for the first time, and I know this came from USL President Jake Edwards when I talked to him Friday, but he said he's hearing now, scuttlebutt that it's possibly going to be 2020, not even 2019. Now, that's coming from the USL President, and not from someone within the Canadian Association. But obviously, he's got ties to Ottawa, and in their situation, he might be hearing this. So I don't think it would be that delayed to that point. But I think for FC Edmonton, again, they're in a rock and a hard place in several ways, and not all of it is their own doing. A lot of it has to do with their geography. But the fact is they don't want to go to there's no chance of going to USL. And it's not a league they don't want to go to, and it's a league that doesn't really want them because the travel costs would be insane on teams in the Western Conference. All of a sudden you're throwing huge plane rides on everyone's schedule, right? And, from the language I'm hearing more and more, especially from the lower divisions of American soccer, is that once the Canadian Premier League starts, it'd be great because we can sort of extricate ourselves from all your Canadian teams because maybe we don't need to deal with this anymore. And that's part of it as well. But they're in a rock and a hard place because they're not really saying much, and I understand why they're not saying much. We know FC Edmonton has been going, and the ownership has been going to the CanPL meetings. They haven't at least publicly committed to CanPL yet, even though they've been going to all the meetings. The reason being, obviously, is the NASL is embroiled in a lawsuit with the United States Soccer Federation. And as well, while FC Edmonton hasn't officially committed or not committed to NASL for if it survives, the league is part of a lawsuit that FC Edmonton, because it's being the Canadian team, isn't named in because it would be inappropriate for them to be. So you can understand there's a lot of balls in the air, but I think it boils down to this, and I would probably use this analogy. I think in the past, a lot of teams that have left NASL have done so on some bitter situation, like Tampa Bay. They've moved leagues or left, and they weren't happy. If FC Edmonton moves, if they move, this is not they don't want this to be an angry breakup. There's a lot of friendships there between Tom Fath and a lot of the other owners, and I know Tom Fath has actually told me he quite likes Rocco Camiso. There's a lot of loyalty there, notwithstanding the money. Just a lot of loyalty there. And Edmonton's attitude is going to be, if we leave NASL, we want NASL to survive with the guys that they have, and we want them to thrive. It just doesn't work for us, right? But this isn't a personal thing. As everyone has said, does the Canadian Premier League ever even happen if there's no NASL? If there's no NASL to give Ottawa and Edmonton that chance, that kind of shows people that it can work in other markets on a bit of a smaller scale. I think there's a lot of thinking there, that there's a lot of loyalty there. So that's another reason why Edmonton's not going to publicly say a lot of things, because there is a lot of still loyalty towards NASL, even if they don't plan to play in the league again, but that they want those guys to survive, and they want the New York Cosmos and Miami FC to go on, and Jacksonville Armada to go on and be a viable league. They don't have that. There's no ill will toward those teams. So, and then definitely a lot of understanding and sympathy for the situation that they're in. Tom Fath has had his frustrations as well with the whole sanctioning issue in the United States. It's just that he's not going to publicly talk about it because as the Canadian team, it's inappropriate for him to talk about an American sanctioning body, just as it would be as inappropriate for the Cosmos to talk about something from the CSA. That's just the way it would go. So Edmonton has to be sort of quiet, but meanwhile, they're caught with this real idea that there might be nothing in 2018. And that's why Tom Fath hasn't put folding off the table, even though I don't think that's a likely outcome. It's not something he's willing to take off the table. I think that's also part of a leverage bargaining tool. I know that there has been frustration, at least from the CanPL talk side, that, things haven't gone as quickly as they could have, or that maybe some teams had hoped, because I think Edmonton, needs to field a team in 2018 of some kind. You can't just take a year off. As well, you lose all. If you have to renegotiate with players anyways if you change leagues, but you lose everybody. Like basically, you start off as an expansion team, like everyone else does. If you lose the year, the advantage that Edmonton would have had going into the year is gone if they go in 2019 and if Edmonton has to take a year off, because everyone goes, the players all leave, and I think that there's going to be some things that the league will have to wrestle with. In if it starts a little bit later than planned, and that's going to be trying to attract players back, because once these guys start going and leaving for other leagues, a lot of them have been on 1-year deals for the last few years, and they're sort of sick and tired of it, and they're going to want some stability. And plus, with the international transfer windows, if they go back to Europe, they're not going to be able to come back for a spring start of a league. So that's always those things that you worry about when you're on a delay, and especially for FC Edmonton's case, where you may have to go dark for a period of time and sort of disappear from the public consciousness, and that's always a dangerous thing.
Stephen Sandor, the 11.ca, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks a lot, guys.
With myself, Kevin Laramee. Joining us on the line now, live from the West Coast, from the early coast, Evan Ream of the Davis Enterprise. Evan, how you doing this morning?
Doing well, actually. Just woke up.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's early over here, but I can't complain. Thanks for having me.
Evan, it was my birthday weekend, so I just woke up too. So it's all fine. All right. You were at the game yesterday. A big crowd there. They were chanting one more year when they did the pitch invasion. The Delta fans at the end of the game. Is that realistic, or was it 1 year and out?
I mean, from everything I've heard, unless there's a situation like happened with the Cosmos last year where they got a last minute, savior. I do believe that the San Francisco Deltas are done as a franchise. From everything I've heard, the players have already been, if they sign multi-year contracts, from what I've heard, they've already been released from their contracts. I know that Mark Dos Santos won't be coming back. And so at this point, if someone were to come in and save them, it would be saving really just a name, and that's about it.
Fair enough. I think there's a book deal there if you want to really look into it, Evan, in terms of the 1-year championship team. There's something interesting about that. Talk about the game a little bit yesterday. I asked Stephen Sandor, our guest previous, whether or not the deserving team won. So I'll ask you the same thing. Are the Deltas the deserving champions of NASL?
I mean, yeah, they scored more goals than the Cosmos. I mean, I don't know. That's such an interesting question. I go back to there was a British Open that Tom Watson won where he was essentially pretty far behind another player, another golfer, and the golfer sort of choked, and Tom Watson ended up beating him. And somebody asked him if he deserved to win. He said deserved had nothing to do with it. I shot the best score. And that's how I feel about soccer. Sometimes the better team doesn't always win, but the team that scored more goals won. And that being said, I do think the Deltas were the better team on the day. But they won the game, and so the championship is theirs.
When you're looking at, Evan, the game last night, was there a somber mood to the game? Was the fact that people knew that not only this is or may very well be the last game in the San Francisco Delta's history, but it could very well be the last game in the NASL history as well. Was there a somber feeling at the game yesterday?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you look at the crowd numbers, and again, that was actually the first Delta games I've been to, because Delta's game I'd been to, because there was so much overlap with Sac Republic this year and other sports coverage I was doing. But if you look at the crowd numbers, they drew 9,500 yesterday, as opposed to, only a couple thousand on a regular basis. Credit to them. They went all out and got a great crowd, and the building was loud yesterday. But that being said, when I walked out, I overheard a few kids, maybe teenagers, saying, "So, are we going to become Deltas fans now?" And the feeling that I had was that, if I had to guess, more people in the building were unaware of the imminent demise of the Deltas than were aware of it. And that's not to say that the diehards weren't aware of it, chanting one more year, but I would have to guess that many of the people in the building were fairly ignorant to what had happened, and maybe it has been their first Deltas game, given that it was a championship game and tickets were just $5. So it's actually kind of unfortunate, because if they could have tapped into that fan base beforehand, then maybe we wouldn't be talking about the Deltas going. But no, I didn't feel a somber mood, because I'm not sure that people were 100% aware of what was actually happening.
San Francisco is such a weird market. It's such an unpredictable market. You would think that a soccer team, especially in the NASL, in hipster city, would get a little bit more attention, would get a little bit more coverage, footprint, a little bit more like ground to keep. Unfortunately, it's a little too late, like you mentioned. Are you surprised by the difficulty of soccer to make it, not just in San Francisco, but in the Bay Area in general? Yes, San Francisco, the San Jose Earthquakes, of course, of the Major League Soccer are doing okay, but the footprint of soccer in the northern part of the Bay Area and northern part of California, it's been more difficult. San Francisco is not the first time that tried to get a professional team going.
I mean, San Francisco can't even get people to go to 49ers games right now.
True.
But, well, that being said, that's actually the 49ers stadium is south of San Jose.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. It's Santa Clara. It's even more south than
the Santa Clara, right? 49ers. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not. It's San Franciscans. There's a lot of things to do in the city. A lot of people who didn't necessarily grow up there. And I mean, honestly, and I wrote about this, the Deltas, before they became a franchise, and I was very skeptical. I actually, their CEO, Brian Helmick, who I think is a terrific person, and he really convinced me that what he was doing could work. And I believed him, maybe because he was so confident in his abilities, and he was so passionate, and it was something really truly amazing to see, to talk to that guy, and I still would, go out and buy that guy a beer, but every gut feeling I had beforehand was that this wasn't going to be successful, and there are, a number of reasons why. I mean, the stadium that they play at, there's essentially no parking, and the public transportation is not great, and San Franciscans, these people they're not going to spend their time and money on something that doesn't feel like it's major league. And NASL is whatever you want to call it, but it doesn't feel like a top division when you have an old building that's not necessarily yours, where they're playing multiple high school football games a week there. It has a racing track around it. It doesn't feel major league. If I'm a San Franciscan, why am I spending my money on that when I can go see the Warriors, or go see the Giants, or even drive an hour south to go see the 49ers? No, I'm not surprised that something like this didn't work. That being said, I think everyone in that front office are tremendous people who maybe had a bad plan, but do deserve better.
So that's how to turn our attention to the league as a whole, Evan. Obviously, there's so much we just don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
So tell me what your thoughts are right now. One more year. Will there be one more year for NASL at all?
I mean, how long are they going to be involved in a lawsuit for? I don't know. I have, as you guys know, don't cover a ton of NASL, and it would be hard for me to cover a ton of NASL because the closest team to me other than the Deltas is the one that your previous guest Steven Sandor covers, all the way in Edmonton. And so I'm not really sure, and I don't think it would be fair of me to have an opinion about something that I don't really know that much about. I mean, maybe it's the last NASL game, maybe not, but I don't. It's hard to cultivate sources on things like this when you only live close to one team out of what are there 8?
Yeah. Yeah. So now, Evan, you cover Sacramento, and do you feel like USL won? Like it's terrible for me. I love players to play, coaches to coach, and fans to watch the game. It's never positive. It's never good, even though we make fun of it sometimes, or we chirp a little bit. We chirp the people we love. We chirp the sport we love. We chirp the things we appreciate. And I appreciate teams. I appreciate leagues. I don't care. I don't mind who's with who's against who. I just want to watch a ball being kicked around and goals being scored, especially free kicks. But that's just my prerogative. What is your thought now heading to next year? Is there a way where people can agree, and maybe the league that you cover, USL, can maybe send a few lifeboats and rescue some players, some teams, some jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've already seen that with, I mean, Ottawa, Tampa Bay jumping ship, and I think it's been reported that North Carolina is going to do the same. I'd certainly see that. It's just, which teams in the NASL want to go. I mean, I don't know about you guys, and maybe you feel differently, but there's no scenario I can imagine that the New York Cosmos play in the USL. And you, as I said, do I think the USL won? I don't think that's necessarily a good term to use. I know you didn't mean it because you said you like to see teams playing. It's just I don't think the USL won. I think that the USL was more self-aware and better understood how the soccer landscape worked. That being said, NASL didn't get any help from US Soccer, but also that being said, NASL, in my opinion, had an unrealistic business model and overshot its bounds with how they always assumed that they were more prominent than they actually were, and probably spent too much money because of it.
Duane had a question. I'll ask him for him. When you're looking at Evan next year, in the next few months, actually, the next few maybe weeks, expansion is going to be announced. We're going to have an expansion for MLS, and Sacramento was part of the bid last January. What are the chances of Sacramento, in your opinion, to be one of those either first 2 or first 4 elected teams?
I would say very high. I think it would be a huge mistake to not. Well, I think it'd be a huge mistake to not include Sacramento in any of the 4 bids, but I think it would almost be a bigger mistake to not include it in the first 2, given how, I guess, disappointed people are at Sacramento that it hasn't already happened. That being said, I mean, if you're MLS, you're not making a bid to appease the people of Sacramento. You're making an expansion announcement to because you think it's the best bid. And I honestly, I've been asked this a bunch of times, and maybe it's because I cover the team, but I don't think there's a better bid than Sacramento on the table right now, and I think that's been the case for multiple years. And basically everything I'm hearing, and again, I could be wrong, everything I'm hearing is that the 2 bids announced this fall would be Sacramento and Nashville. Sorry, not this fall, this winter. And I think it makes sense for Sacramento, because if they did get the announcement this December, they could have a stadium ready for, or at least they say they could have a stadium ready for opening day in 2020. And it would be a downtown soccer specific stadium. in an area that the city's trying to revitalize, and I think it would work really well. And I don't see any way that Sacramento could not be part of the expansion group this first time. That being said, it's MLS, so who knows?
Evan Ream of the Davis Enterprise, thank you very much for your time today. Where can the listeners find you on social media, and where can they find your work?
Just at Evan Ream or davisenterprise.com if people are interested, I guess. Thanks, Kevin.
Perfect. Talk to you soon, Evan.
All right, have a good one.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And welcome back to Soccer Today. Duane, today, two big World Cup qualifiers that got some part of the world in disarray. Italy is in shambles in Milan right now, the San Siro. In just a few hours, Italy versus Sweden. Second leg, it's 1-0 Sweden. It's going to be a very tense afternoon.
For sure. It's been since, 1950 whatever, since Italy's
58.
not made a World Cup.
58.
This would be an immensely disappointing situation for a lot of Italians. And I have a lot of Italian friends, so I don't know. I mean, I kind of want to see the better team win, obviously, but I feel for my friends. But that said, it's been a good run for them. If they miss one, they'll be okay.
It's been a good run. You were a good run,
yeah.
Italy. That was a good run.
Yeah, I watched that game pretty closely. I watched all the qualifying games on Friday, I guess it was, and that was a long day, man. I sat there watched an African qualifier at noon and watched the Peruvian New Zealand game that went to like midnight, and then I went to a nightclub because it was my weekend. So it was a long day, but certainly Italy didn't look right. And it would be a terrible way for Buffon, who was named the second best goalkeeper of all time today by one of those polls. So that's something there.
Who's
be
first?
Away for
Come on. Second? Come on. He needs to be first. Who's in front of him?
I actually didn't see that. I just saw people complaining about Buffon getting second. So there you
Exactly.
go.
Well, that's why. Because nobody should be in front of Gianluigi Buffon.
Exactly. But it'd be a terrible way for him to go out. So I'm torn in this game because Sweden's kind of a nice underdog story, but you obviously want those big clubs in. And Italy, as I said, they've had a good run, quote unquote hilarious, but they've also had some down cycles in the last few years. Like they went out that 3 and out a couple of World Cups ago. Was that 2010 that they went 3 and out? It's all blending now, but nonetheless, there have been some bad World Cups for them in that mix. It might have been Germany that they went 3 and out. It's going to be an intriguing game to watch this afternoon for sure, and that's where a lot of the eyes will be on. I'm mostly interested in the Peruvian New Zealand game.
Yeah.
Having watched that game with my Peruvian friends, we had Martin on and some other friends that I had there, so that was fun, and it was a fun night. And they were fairly happy with the draw that they got. Australia, Honduras. I watched that with a Honduran who was not happy at all about the not being able to get a goal at San Pedro Sulu, and
good,
factor that.
That's how it feels. That's how it feels, Honduras. That's how we feel every damn time.
No, and then look, I think that I tweeted it out today. There was a nice story going around comparing and contrasting the way that Honduras was flying to Australia versus the way Australia did. Australia had a private jet. They had some high-tech stuff going on there to avoid the jet lag. They did a stretch break in Honolulu. They landed in Sydney. When they landed in Sydney, the Honduran plane, which was wasn't charter, it was a commercial flight, was in a layover in LAX. So Honduras was still in LA when Australia already got back to Australia, and they had all this high-tech stuff going on in a private jet the entire time to try and recuperate. So who says money doesn't play a role in international football, right?
Yeah,
it's going to be very difficult for the Hondurans to get over that hump, and if they can manage to do that, good for them. But I think Australia's got to be the clear favorite there.
Don't tell me we're going to have limits on charter flights in international soccer now after MLS. Come on.
No, that's not going to happen.
Please.
But look at my Twitter. It is fascinating. Look at my Twitter feed. It was one of those Twitter moments things. It's really interesting, some of the stuff they were doing with it's a light therapy that they do to try and help you avert the jet lag.
And those pants that are inflatable pants that helps get blood in and out of your muscle as well to make sure there's no lactic acid accumulation inside the fibers of the muscle. Yeah, and there's a lot of technology that teams can use nowadays to recuperate faster, to help muscles regenerate, and make sure that everyone is up to shape and up to game shape quicker after especially when it's an home and away leg. There's Denmark-Ireland this afternoon too. But when I want to finish the show by going back on the NSL and the Soccer Bowl as well, I want to congratulate personally everyone involved with the San Francisco Deltas. Like Steven Sandor alluded earlier, it wasn't an easy situation, especially the last 2 months of the regular season and the playoffs, when basically everyone was aware of the demise of the club after November 15th, and still were able to pull performances and results, and were able to raise a trophy. And for Mark Dos Santos, third straight final, I want to congratulate him. He's maybe the most underrated coach in North American soccer right now, with the New York Cosmos head coach Duane Savarese. But those two coaches deserve a chance, I believe, in Major League Soccer or in a top flight somewhere in the world of soccer. But I want to congratulate as well Kyle Becker, Maxime Tissot, Carl Wimet, Nana Adekora, Simeon Jackson, Tom Heineman, and company of the San Francisco Deltas. Players that either are Canadian, played in Canada, had a role to say with some important clubs for us here in Canada. They kept their head down, kept plowing through, and were able to, in some cases, like Cal Wimet, Cal Becker, and maybe even Maxime Tissot, have made enough to deserve maybe a comeback chance next year with an MLS roster.
Well, you like Wimet, Tissot. We've talked about these guys a lot, and it's sort of they're guys that fell through the cracks in MLS. And I can speak more personally to the two TFC guys on there. Kyle Becker, who was really just had an epiphany of a season, right? In the sense that he stood up, and I think of all those guys, the one that's most likely to get a higher level chance again based on his play this year is Becker. He really was playing brilliantly in the middle and was sort of finally realizing some of that potential that a lot of people saw in him and made him such a high draft pick many years ago now.
That more offensive,
but I do want to talk a little.
That more offensive presence that he was trusted with this year. Like, that's the thing. I remember when he was with Toronto, or remember he was good with Dallas because he was trusted with offensive. He was not given too many responsibilities defensively, right? He was almost not free, but freer or free-ish. Now with Toronto, it wasn't the case, and with Montreal, it wasn't the case. I don't know if this Canadian aspect, you have to work on your defensive side, but he was like bogged down and confused a bit of how always to have to be responsible defensively. He was freed by Mark Dos Santos, especially from the midpoint of the season on, and you can tell in his results and his stats that he appreciated that.
Yeah, no, precisely, and I do hope to see him get a chance. I don't think it's going to be an MLS based on the domestic rules. Obviously, if NASL is around again next year, he'll probably find another contract there somewhere. He did enough to earn that. Certainly, USL would be an option for him too. But I'd kind of like to see Kyle take a shot maybe in the Scandinavian leagues or something along that level in Europe. At this point, I think he's done enough to do that. But I do want to quickly, before we say goodbye in the show, I do want to mention Nana Adekora a little bit. Nana, for those that, that goes back to like early ICF days, and we're talking about, we call him young Nana because Chris Cummings, the TFC coach, that was coach number 3 in the TFC's run, 3 or 4. It's hard to keep track of them. Anyway, he used to always call him young Nana every time we referred to him. So young Nana's not so young anymore, but he's really revitalized his career and found a real home in NASL. And I think that he's a guy that's perfect to talk about right now before we say goodbye, because he's exactly what that league is about and why that league is valuable to the system here. He's not going to necessarily play on the national team setup. So a lot of people get so focused on that. Well, he's played a few games for Canada since he's gone to NASL. But he's found a home. He's found a professional career there. And the more guys you can have playing, the deeper your pool, the deeper everything is, and the better everything is for you. And Nana Adekora is a very nice guy. I had a chance to deal with him a lot back in the last part of the last decade. Spoke to him on the phone a few times. Saw him in person quite a few times. He's just a genuinely nice guy. And he had a bit of a tough run, both personally and professionally, at the end of his time in Toronto. So I'm really, really happy every time I see him successful. And hopefully he can stick around long enough that he could be in the Canadian Premier League at launch, because I think he'd make a hell of a captain on one of those teams in a final swan song to his career. But, if he can't do that, and if NASL goes away and he walks away from the game as a champion, then that's something successful too. And young Nana deserves our tip of the hat as a guy that really found a good place for himself and found success, and we congratulate him.
And no matter what happens from now on, you'll forever be champion. You're never former champion. You're always a champion.
Touche.
And until tomorrow, as always, you can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. And until tomorrow, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.